Welcome to Mujer Latina, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to interview you.
Well, I'm delighted to be interviewed.
Mr. Treviño, you were raised in East LA. How was your childhood?
Well, one of the things that happened, I grew up during a time when there was very little presence of Latinos in the media, really in American society. And I grew up with I never saw any positive portrayals of Latinos. And so I grew up with a big inferiority complex. I believed that, from what I saw in the world around me, that Mexicans, I'm Mexican, American, and my parents were Mexican, that Mexicans were basically an inferior people because I never saw it other than as janitors or gardeners, manual labor. And so I grew up with a very negative sense of self, and even to the point where I was in junior high, I resolved to try not to be Mexican. My given name is Jesús, but I felt so bad about being Mexican that I changed my name to Jess, because I thought Jess sounded more American, and that was kind of how I felt, that I was very inferior to my friends who were Anglo. I went to a school where there were quite a number of Anglos and children, and so I grew up basically hating myself. And it was not until the late 1960s when the Chicano movement came around, and when leaders like Cesar Chavez and others began to say, we have a right to equality, and we must get rid of this discrimination that has haunted our communities, that I began to see that there was a historical reason for why we as Mexicanos, as Latinos, had been put on the lower end of the economic scale. And I began to realize that in fact, my people were not inferior, but were rather the product of 100 years of colonization that began once the Mexican-American War was over. Mexican-Americans in the Southwest, in particular, became the laborers for American society. We worked in the mines, we worked in the fields, we worked on the ranches. And so I began to have a different perspective, and I began to, for the first time in my life, feel good about who I was.
Did your parents discourage you from speaking Spanish?
We spoke Spanish in the house. I was raised by my stepfather, who was Anglo. He spoke English, but my mother and all my relatives spoke Spanish. So I grew up in a Spanish-speaking environment. So I was able to be to benefit from both, learning both languages and being part of both cultures. But when I was going to school, there was, Latinos, unfortunately, were being pushed out of school at an enormous rate. And on the high school that I went to, 50% of the kids that entered in junior high never graduated. And the bulk of these were Mexicanos, were Latinos. I was lucky in that part of what I did, just for my own survival, was I hung out with a lot of Americans, Anglo boys, and they were the ones where I heard for the first time about going to college. I had never heard about college. I didn't know what college was, but their parents knew. And their parents were saying, you have to take the SAT test, and you have to prepare for college, and you have to start making, enrolling in applying for your school. And I didn't know any of that, but I learned it from them. I think that I had a difficult time, but I was lucky to get a scholarship to go to college. One of the very, very early, this is 1964, so it was one of the very, very first times that they were giving any kind of scholarships to minorities. And I did graduate from a 4-year school, and that's when the Chicano movement came by, and that's when I began to get very, very involved in the Chicano movement because my old high school, the students at my old high school, were part of the groups that walked out of the high schools to protest the inferior education. And when I saw that on television one night, I realized that I had to get involved.
Where did you get the inspiration to start making and directing movies?
I went to a community meeting, and I remember it well because I walked into this room, and the room was full of Mexican Americans, men and women, and young people. And they were all talking about the injustices that had been committed against the Mexican Americans. And they all were talking about the need to have equality, the need to end discrimination. And in those days, we had, of course, many, many problems, social problems, and society had pretty much forgotten it. And we had an enormous, as I said earlier, push-out rate in the high schools. Our kids were dropping out of school. They were not getting the education they needed. They were going into gangs. They were getting involved with drugs. There was huge unemployment. Housing was terrible. There was very little medical attention to speak of. We had no political representation. In 1970, I think there was only 4 members of Congress that were Latino.
Yeah.
And here in Los Angeles, we had only had one Latino alderman. In 1949, Edward Roybal, was elected, and once he left in 1962, there was no Latinos on the city council. So for many, many years, we had just been, ignored, and we were powerless. And I heard these people at that meeting talking about how we were going to take control and how we were going to change things. And I began to get immediately involved, and I had a Super 8 camera, and I began to use it to document the various rallies that we would have in the community. There would be a case of police brutality, and the community would come out, and we would picket a police station, or there would be a case of a principal that had beat up on a young boy or young girl, and we would picket the school, and I would film these demonstrations with my Super 8 camera, and then I would edit together a little movie, sometimes 2 minutes long, sometimes 3 minutes long, and then I would show this in the community meetings, and we would use it as an organizer. We would show people the demonstration, and we'd say, next week we're going to have another one, join us. And so pretty soon I began to see the value of the use of media to bring about education in our community and to bring about social change.
That was 40 years ago. Do you believe the kids in East LA today are facing the same challenges that you faced when you were growing up, like education, job opportunities, economic disparities, or racial discrimination at this point, when you look back and you compare to right now?
Well, I've written a memoir called Eyewitness, a filmmaker's memoir of the Chicano movement. And I talk about my activities as a filmmaker, chronicling a lot of the events that went on at the time. But in the final chapter, I do a comparison. I ask myself, so have things gotten better or worse? Mm-hmm. I wrote the book 10 years ago, and so it was after 30 years, have things gotten better or worse? And I didn't want to just speculate. I wanted facts. So I did a lot of studies. And I went back to statistical information, the number of Mexicans or Latinos that were in prison, the high school dropout rate, the number of political people in elected office, the health care, the drugs, et cetera, et cetera. I went through all the different issues that impact on our community, and I did it for 1970, and then I did it for the year 2001. And it was a mixed bag. There were certainly some areas where we had made major gains. One of them, the most obvious one, was political power. We had, during the movement days of the 60s and 70s, we politicized our community. We went out and registered people to vote by the millions, and it began to manifest itself in us getting Latinos elected to political power. We also, some of our our attorneys took on some of the illegal gerrymandering that prevented us from getting elected officials, and they changed some of these laws so that we could elect Mexican Americans or other Latinos to political power. So in some areas like politics, things had gotten better. But in other areas, they had stayed the same or they had gotten worse. So today, the dropout rate in East Los Angeles is still about 50% in the East LA high school.
We have moved forward in different ways, but in other ways, like education, we're still way behind. And I have known a lot of Latinos that they will not be able to go to college because they don't have the documents. So that's another big issue that we have in the youth.
And you know, back in 1970, if you spoke about the population of East Los Angeles, you were primarily speaking about Mexican origin people, Mexican Americans and Mexicans. But since that time, there has been a huge influx in throughout the United States, and in particular in Los Angeles, of people from Central America, from Latin America, and yet many of these people have moved into these neighborhoods and are really experiencing the same kind of poverty and discrimination that my generation of Mexicans experienced way back in the 1970s. Certainly the education area is one of them. The gang issue has gotten even worse. The number of Mexican or Latino origin people who are in the California state prisons, for example, has gotten enormously more than in those days. So there's a lot of areas that obviously have not changed or have gotten worse and that really need attention. And what I've been gratified by is to see a younger generation of Latinos who, they don't use the term Chicano, which is fine. They use the term Latino, and they see the big picture, and they realize that they need to work for social change. And I think we saw that a couple of years ago in May of 2006, when nationally you saw this huge movement of immigrant rights. Remember the big marches?
Of course.
And of course, much of that was the young generation saying, we've had enough. These are our parents who are being deported. And so I think there's a great conciencia in a lot of the young people today. They want to bring about social change. They see the problems. They've lived the problems and are living the problems. And they know that change is possible. And I think that if you look back at the 60s, I think the one thing that you can get is you can get inspired to see how we were able to bring about social change in many areas. The fact that there are areas that still remain to be addressed doesn't take away from the fact that we did make many gains. And certainly what we did do was we created a whole generation of people who are educators, who are attorneys, who are social workers, welfare workers, people, community activists who believe in bringing about social change. And unlike other generations where people tried to move away from the barrio and pretend that these problems, leave the problems behind, there's been a whole number of generations now who have embraced the challenges of bringing social change to our communities and are saying, I'm going to live in the barrio, I'm going to bring about change in the barrio, and that's what I'm doing. And that has been very inspiring to me.
Which of the hats have you found most satisfying?
Well, I got into filmmaking as a documentary filmmaker, but I always wanted to work with actors, and I was lucky because after many years, I was able to work in Hollywood as a director of primetime television. I've done over 100 hours of primetime shows on American television in English, and of course, people like me are the exception to the rule. There are very, very few Latinos who direct episodic TV. But I've done that, and I've gotten great reward for that personally, working with great actors, working with great crews, being able to bring my vision to a given project. But I also continue to do the kinds of documentaries that I started with back in 1969. In 1969, I started doing my first little documentaries, and by 1970 and 71 and 72, they had become half-hour documentaries, one-hour documentaries. Some of them were broadcast nationally on PBS. So I keep going back to that experience because I think that my heart is still very much in my community. I still think we have many, many issues that need to be addressed, and films is one way of doing it. And so I balance it. I balance my professional work in Hollywood with my community work as a Chicano filmmaker. And I don't think the two are contradictory. To the contrary, I think that they enrich each other. My social vision, I come to bear when I direct television shows. I think it makes the shows better because I have a political awareness and I can bring that to my directing. And at the same time, working in Hollywood allows me to make enough of a salary to be able to invest some of that money into my own documentaries for my community. So that's what I continue to do. The other aspect of it is my writing. And my writing really stems in many ways from the frustration that Hollywood is not ready in many ways to hear our Latino stories. I remember once going with a story. I thought it was an evergreen story. It was a Christmas story that took place in East Los Angeles. And I pitched it to some producers. And the producer said to me, you know, you're a very smart person. The story is a good story, but, you know, it's limited because it's only about Latinos. Why don't you do stories about the mainstream society? And they rejected the story because it was a Latino story. And I came home very frustrated, and I was very angry. And I said to myself, you know, I can either respond to this destructively, either venting or hurting myself, or I can respond to this constructively by taking this story and making it into a short story and getting it out that way. And that was one of the many stories that started, and since then I've published 2 collections of short stories about Latinos, about a fictional town that I've created called Arroyo Grande in Texas. And it's a make-believe town, but all the characters are based on people that I know. And there are stories about our community, about our foibles, about the good and the bad of who we are. And it's a way of getting that vision that's in me out because I'm not going to be able to do it in a mainstream way because America right now is not ready for that. And we've had some victories. We've had shows like Resurrection Boulevard that I directed the pilot for, and I was co-executive producer, and that was a real win for us. It was a victory because it was the first time that we were on prime time, and it was a major network showtime, and it was in English, and it was about a Mexican-American family in East Los Angeles, all Latino cast. It was wonderful. And we've had American Family, the great novel series as well. But those are few and far between. And for the most part, American television we're still in many ways off the map. It's interesting to me sometimes the awareness that Hollywood has about race. For example, you look at American television shows, and most of them are ensemble pieces where you have 4 or 5 actors in a given show. Grey's Anatomy or you name it, Law and Order or any of the shows, ER. And when you look at these shows, you always find, African Americans, but you don't find it with the same presence, the same numbers, Latinos. And this is because I think the Hollywood producers are more aware of the African American experience than they are of the Latino one, although statistically Latinos outnumber African Americans in the United States. And so we're the majority, but you wouldn't know it from watching American television. It's rare when you see that. So those are things that have to change. And I try to do it in my own way, working in Hollywood. I'm involved with the Directors Guild of America. I'm on the national board. I am also involved in the Latino Committee of the Directors Guild of America. We try to do many, many projects that advance our people. And of course, when I'm directing, of course, I try to cast not just Latinos, but all minorities. I believe in colorblind casting. I believe that, for too long, there were shows where all these principals were white. Well, that doesn't have to be. And so whenever there's a role to be cast in the project that I'm working on, I insist on colorblind casting. If it's a judge, if it's a police officer, if it's a private detective, if it's a nurse, if it's a doctor, I want to see some Asian people come in to audition for that role. I want to see some African Americans. I want to see some Latinos. And of course Caucasians, so that the role goes to the best actor, but at least we have a chance. And so that we can create a world on the screen that is reflective of the real reality of what America is. I've seen shows that have been shot in downtown Los Angeles, and there have been, it's a crowd scene, and all the crowd people are white, and there's no Latinos. And if you know Los Angeles, downtown Los Angeles, next to Mexico City, is probably the most concentrated place where you're going to find Mexicans. And yet, the Hollywood producers come in, they bring their own extras, and they create a scene that takes place in downtown Los Angeles, and there's no Latinos in the show. And you sit there and you wonder, what world are they living in?
Well,
but these are things that I think will change as more and more of us begin to penetrate into the industry and make a mark in Hollywood. People who work in Hollywood, they're concerned about, I've got to make a lot of money. And I was in a sense fortunate because I came of age during the Chicano movement, and that movement was not about money. It was about helping our communities and empowering our communities and making life a better life for everyone. And that has always stuck with me. I was in picket lines. I was arrested. I was beat up. All those things shape you. I think that I'm proud that I've done what I've done, but it's always been about, what's the right thing to do, and I've tried to do that.
Do you think that we know that we are very organized now as Latinos, but do you think that maybe we need a 60s movement that make us understand the value of just being a Latino, to have the power of...
I think we need a movement, but I think that, and I've talked to a number of younger people about this, because, when we were doing social change back in the 60s and early 70s, we would go take to the streets. I think today that's certainly one avenue, but I think we're being short-visioned if we think that that's the only way to bring about social change. The real way we're going to bring about social change is getting into positions of power, and that means education, and that means study, and that means infiltrating the system, if you will, and getting to positions where you can make a difference. When I hire a crew, I have a lot of power. And who do I hire? I hire Latinos. Mm-hmm. And there was a time when people like me didn't exist. When I was starting out in 1969, 70, you didn't have Latino directors like Greg Nava, like Luis Valdez, like Robert Rodriguez, and quite a number of the others that we now have. And a lot of those people, producers like Montezuma Esparza, filmmakers like Silvio Morales, and when these people get into positions of power, they hire Latinos. And that has been one of the ways in which our community has advanced in Hollywood. Because you can't, you have to work more than just one show. You have to build a career over many, many shows over many, many years. And for too long we've been excluded. And it has only been until now when we have our own generation of people who are hiring our own that we begin to make a difference in that respect. And so I do believe that change is continuing to be brought about. It's a lot slower than I would ever have expected, believe me. I wish it were going faster for a number of reasons, not just because we need it, but also I see the younger people today, and I just think, my gosh, do they have to go through so many of the things that I went through?
Yeah, that's what I'm...
And so, and that's troublesome because obviously we have many, many talented young people, and that's the one thing that I'm beginning to see now. I mentor a lot of young filmmakers, Latino filmmakers, and I'm happy to see their talent in them. I'm happy to see that it's not just, Caucasian kids that have great ability and vision and stories to tell. I see these young Latinos, men and women, who do have a lot of important things to say. And I, to the degree that I can, I mentor them. I give them advice. I try to help them. And I think that their task is going to be to continue in the kind of trajectory that my generation started.
Mr. Treviño, I understand you are working on a Latino and art and cultural website. Could you share some details about this project?
Yes, I have, back when I started, I used to work on a Mexican-American public affairs show in Los Angeles. It was in 1969. It was the first show of its kind. It was called Ahora.
Mm-hmm.
And in that show, we covered, it was a half-hour daily live broadcast. And we produced it in a studio in East Los Angeles. It was broadcast locally in Southern California. In that show, we did Mexican-American history, we did art, we did literature, we did theater, we showed films that made by the young Latino filmmakers at the time. We had music performances. We even showed people how to do cocina mexicana. And that always struck with me because it was really a service to the community. And so what I have decided is that I'm going to take that concept and put it on the internet. And it hasn't been launched yet, but I am going to be launching in the next few months. And it will be a website where you can hear Latino authors read from their works, where you can see profiles of Latino artists, where you can read about Latino history. I'm going to have a timeline. I have a timeline of 200 years of Latino history in America, beginning in 1776, our contributions, the events that are important to Mexican-American, Cuban-American, and Puerto Rican-American history since 1776. And, of course, I'll be expanding it to include other groups as well as time goes along. We're also going to have food recipes, theater performances. All of these are going to be video-driven. So when you go to the website, you'll be able to see, I'm going to begin with short 5-minute videos in all of these areas: history, art, literature, music, theater, cinema, and food. And there will also be a lot of print material that you can download. 100 years of Latino literature in America, 100 years of Latino art in America, 100 years of Latino cinema in America. Profiles, biographies, interviews, all of this will be part of the website. And I'm doing it, because I hope eventually to begin to produce original dramas for the website. But to begin with, I'm going to be doing these 7 different areas that I think will find great appeal to our community.
Any message for the Hispanic Latino community of the Midwest and for people like me that still are looking to fulfill our dreams?
Well, first of all, let me congratulate you about having your show and your website, because I think that the future for our people is going to be on the internet. And I think, websites like the one you have, like the one I'm going to build, These are going to be crucial because if you look at our younger generation, they live on the internet. And I think that even our older generations are becoming accustomed to browsing and doing email and stuff. And so I think that this is going to be, too often Latinos have been at the tail end of social change. And I think there's no excuse for us not to be at the front end of the new media.
But also,
the front end of the change that's coming about in America. And you look at America and everything is changing. You look at how print media has been affected by the internet. You look at how movies and television are being affected. They now have a thing called Hulu.com where you can actually see TV programs and movies on the internet itself. And all of this is what the future is going to hold for our people. And I just think that you're doing terrific in going ahead and being ahead of the curve and putting this out there. And I think that that's really what we need to be doing. We need to be forward-looking and encouraging young people especially to take hold of the internet and make it ours. There's no reason why we as Latinos have to be at the tail end of it. We need to be in the forefront.
I really appreciate it that you have taken the time today. I know you're pretty busy. Oh, somebody asked me, please ask him which one is your favorite director and the favorite movie.
Oh, of all time?
Oh, yes.
There are many, but certainly Akira Kurosawa, who is a Japanese filmmaker, was very influential in me. Certainly the Americans like John Ford, and of course the ones that I have grown up with, like the Spielbergs and the George Lucases, for their invention, for their technological change, because I believe that again we need to be at the forefront of that as well. And so and of course our own classic director, Luis Buñuel, who is, the granddaddy of them all in a sense.
Perfect. Are you working in one project right now? Can you share with us what you're doing?
I'm basically juggling the launch of the website with the release of a documentary that will be released later on this year called Visions of Aztlan. It is a 1-hour documentary that looks at the birth of the Chicano art movement in America. I've interviewed 30 different artists from all of the first generation, artists from Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, the Midwest, and I look at what images existed of us before the Chicano civil rights movement, and then I explore how the civil rights movement was instrumental in shaping the careers of so many of these artists. They became politically, socially committed. They realized that they could put their art to work for their community, and they realized that their community needed images of itself. And so they began to do the murals, the silk screens, the paintings, and the film explores all the different themes that have now become very popular and very common when you think of Chicano art, the Chicano art movement.
And that will be
film will be out later on this year.
And that will be in PBS, or?
I'm hoping to get it on PBS, yeah.
Well, good luck, Mr. Treviño. Thank you so much for taking your time today and giving us this opportunity to learn your story.
Thank you very much. And thank you again for hosting me.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.